right, why don't you go ahead, Bob?
Okay, after the terrible night that we spent in the foundation of that house, when daybreak came, there was a small stone barn to my right rear here across from the foundation of the house. There was a young officer there, and he ordered the four of us who spent the night in that foundation to join them in the barn. But there was still machine gun fire coming down this direction, so it meant running a gauntlet there. And I remember in the rear of the barn where the entrance was, there were two of our guys on a light machine gun. And so the four of us went inside, and since it was a small barn, all the openings were already occupied, and including that were several men up in the hayloft. And I was hungry at that time, and I had a can of cheese that I opened and started to eat. And then one of the men called down from the hayloft and said that there was a German tank approaching from my left rear, running parallel with the primary roadway that the Germans needed. And he said there were German soldiers on the back of the tank. And then he kept counting and counting and counting. And I've said that when he got up to 7 tanks loaded with infantry, my appetite deserted me. But he kept counting, and till he got up to 13 tanks that bypassed us. And then the fact that the Germans were killing prisoners went like wildfire through the ranks. And we had a discussion there about what we should do. Should we try to stick it out here? Or should we try to get back to our own guys up in the top of the ridge? And there was a Captain Jordan in a tank there, the only tank left. And he called down to the lieutenant and ordered us to stay. But then our lieutenant, he said to us, we are going to decide what we will do, nobody else. So we sort of took a vote, and we decided that we would try to get back to our own lines. And but before that happened, for some unusual reason, can't understand why, the two guys on the machine gun opened up on the column of tanks, which was absolutely foolhardy. And of course, one of the tanks swung its turret in their direction in one round, and they were both dead. But one at a time, we made our way out of the rear of the barn, and we had to go through some cattle fences, and then the road was elevated at that place. So going up to that elevated roadway made us fair targets, but for some reason, the German column didn't bother us. And when we got up on that roadway, we knew that on the other side, there was a ditch, or there was at least enough of a raised roadway to give us some kind of protection. But we were shocked when we got on the roadway to see all kinds of equipment that had been just abandoned by the men who had come in to dig, the men from the 75th Division who had come in to dig in behind us and to give us support. They just abandoned their positions evidently and ran to the rear, dropping their equipment on the way. But one at a time we made our way up there, and we made it back up the hill to where our half tracks were and the rest of the company was. And we were quite incensed because they had pulled back under somebody's orders, but we had never been informed of that, so we stuck the night out. But I think it did have a benefit because we represented much more than was present. The Germans must have thought because we were here that there was an additional company possibly. So it happened that when those tanks passed us, that was a consequence of their misinformation. And why they didn't send out a patrol in the morning and discover the lack of any resistance is beyond me. But finally, the lead tank had been damaged, and that blocked the entire movement of the column. So meanwhile, they called out the artillery and they called out the Air Force, And between the artillery and the bombing and strafing, the whole column was forced to back their way out of that situation behind the village of Grant Menil. And later on, they really showered us with a barrage of shells from their guns. 13 tanks provided quite an artillery barrage, but that was the last bit of resistance. The resistance collapsed then, and we stopped the 2nd SS Panzer Division in their march toward Liège and Antwerp. So that ended a very fearful, frightening night, but it did have its rewards. Okay.